Bonjour, hello. After a full, nice lunch, I'd like to welcome you to our symposium on learners' interactions at the computer. So there are 5 of us, 4 presentations, and this is the way we are going to do this. So I'll be presenting first, followed by Matt, and then Françoise, and Catherine and Marie-José, and then we have 20 minutes for discussion after the presentations. In between the time, questions that are more or will lead more into a discussion, we'd like you to hold for that last 20-minute session. So I would like to start out by talking about interaction-based research in CAL. More specifically, during the talk, I would like to give you an overview of the issues that basically center around interaction-based research in CAL. By looking at the kinds of interactions we concern ourselves with, and also how would we observe these kinds of interactions, and what is actually the goal of, or some of these goals and outcomes of interaction-based research. So by now it's unquestionable that the interaction which L2 learners engage in provide one of the main sources for L2 acquisition data. For instance, Albright refers to interaction as the fundamental fact of pedagogy. And according to Alice, teaching can be profitably viewed as interaction that supplies learners with opportunities for learning. Accordingly, research that examines the relationship between interaction and second language acquisition helps inform language learning pedagogy. Now, since interaction has been shown to be important for second language acquisition, as CAL researchers and CAL practitioners, we are interested in the benefits of the interactions learners engage in through language learning technology. So cognitive interactionist and sociocultural SLA theories have provided the theoretical background and departure point for interaction-based research. When we look at cognitive interactionist perspectives, interaction is the necessary mechanism for making language comprehensible, and the focus is on the nature of input and activities that are likely to prompt noticing of form and meaning mapping. Sociocultural theory, among others, focuses on the people and their practices that foster language learning, more specifically when they interpret and construct meaning during interaction. So clearly, learners' use of technology involves various forms of interaction. One of them is between the learner and the computer, and the learner and other people who are actually sitting in front of the computer and engaging through computer-mediated communication. So when we talk about interaction-based research, the methods in CAL generally manipulate the types of interaction in which language learners are involved in by focusing on aspects of human-computer interaction and computer-mediated communication. So the 3 central questions I would like to address now are basically, what are the types of CAL interactions that are of interest to us? How can we observe and collect data on these interactions? And what are possible applications, interpretations, and or outcomes of interaction-based research? With respect to the types of interactions, I am focusing on the 3 I chose here. And the first one is learners' performance is followed by computer-generated feedback. And the articles I'm citing here is only a small selection of people who have worked in that area. So take them just as a sample. So that first type of interaction then Feedback can come from instructional materials containing explicit exercises, aimed basically at providing learners with practice on particular grammatical forms and meanings, with the intention to actually engage learners in focused interactions that illuminate their gaps in their knowledge. A second type of interaction occurs when learners ask for help in their comprehension and production of the language. And Matt will give us an example of that in his talk, where learners actually engaged with a learner corpus for their grammatical knowledge. So when we look at these environments or these interactions where learners ask for help, these interactions generally take place when learners ask for repetitions, modifications, or elaborations, and while they are engaged in meaning making. They therefore can be conceptualized similarly to the potentially valuable interactions that occur actually in face-to-face interactions, because these help tools we have available for these learners give them that knowledge of meaning they are after. Now, developers of CAL can either intentionally provide these opportunities by making these help options available for the learner, or we can also teach our learners or teachers strategies in how to especially exploit these kinds of tools. So our third type of interaction refers to learners communicating with other learners through computer-mediated communication. And Françoise will give us an example of this one shortly. So our third type of interaction then, the study of these learners' interaction in oral and written CMC, both in and outside the classroom, has demonstrated expanded opportunities for interaction for language learners beyond face-to-face tasks. And while some teachers and researchers have developed and investigated tasks that are very similar to what we would find in face-to-face interactions, others have modified them according to their findings. What is important there is, and we attended the symposium earlier today, is actually that the role the teacher plays in actually teaching students in how to best exploit an environment like that, such as CMC. So it is not that we can, as teachers or students, basically delve into an environment like that without being actually taught how we would best use it. Now, to address the second question I posed was, how do we observe these interactions and what kind of data collection methods do we have? Swain, Chappell, many others, we need to examine what learners actually do, not what the researcher assumes instructions and task demands will lead learners to do. This is a very important point in that in a CAL environment, software features are often designed in a very particular way. But once we see learners using it, for a number of reasons, they actually don't use it the way they were intended to or were designed. So, for example, one of an earlier study by Cobb and Stevens in 1996, they found that students were actually instructed that there were some pedagogical features they should access and they would be beneficial to their learning. But once the students actually used the piece of software outside class, it turned out that they had never used it, although they knew that they were beneficial to their learning. So we need to actually, to make assertions and gain insights about what it is our students, with respect to learning outcomes, we need to investigate what our students actually do. So how can we do this? So the four main data collection or research methods in that regard are, the first one, data logs. And these are basically tracking procedures where we track learners, what they do. And the second one, then, video recordings, eye tracking. We have these recordings. As we heard earlier when Carol was talking about the mixed methods, These methodologies, data collection and research methodologies, should not be seen in isolation, and they are hardly used anymore in isolation. So, for example, data logs are often combined with eye tracking and other combinations, which I will talk about shortly as well. Why is that the case? Many studies have shown, for example, Smith, 2008, he did a study where he wanted to find out about the error correction behavior of students using CMC. And he employed two methods. One was data logs and the other one was eye tracking. With the data logs, what he found was that students actually didn't correct or hardly corrected their postings. Why was that the case? Well, he looked at the logs and he saw, well, the language they produced was hardly corrected. But when he looked at the eye tracking, he found something very different. And that was only due because he did the eye tracking. Because when you look at a data log, you only see the final product. Once I hit return, right? You see what is posted. When I look at eye tracking, you actually see the student is typing the sentence in before they hit the return button, they hit the delete button and are correcting their language while they are producing it. So something like this is only possible with mixed methods research, and that was illustrated with those two. Similarly, when you look at surveys and questionnaires, nowadays you will hardly find a study anymore where only surveys or questionnaires are employed. And Hubbard did a survey where he looked at journals, I think from 2000 to 2003 or 4, and found that actually only 15% of the studies on interaction-based research only employ surveys in isolation. Otherwise, it is a combination of quantitative and qualitative research methodologies, such as, for example, data logs combined with questionnaires. And finally, we have retrospective interviews and think-alouds, something I like to use a lot in combination with data logs, because it gives you that nice balance of quantitative and qualitative research methodology, which Carol was talking about earlier today. So now, we answered the first two questions, or considered the first two questions, by looking at what kind of interactions are we interested in, and secondly, what kind of collection or research methodologies do we employ to actually observe students during these interactions. So the third one is looking at goals of interaction-based research and possible outcomes. So why are we doing this? What can be gained from this type of research? Well, one is we're looking at assessment of learning outcomes. Meaning, if I, for instance, have a learner interaction between the learner and the computer, and I, for instance, implement different feedback types, then I'm interested in finding out which feedback type actually works better. By working better, I mean, where do I see a better learning outcome? So this is one main area, and I didn't list any studies here, but naturally, this is one of the, I would say, the one which has the majority of articles in interaction-based research. But a second application of that interaction-based research is actually that we look at software evaluation and design. And as Hubbard and Colbert have pointed out about this and talked about the cyclical process of software development and then interpretation, implementation, and new evaluations of it, what we see here is basically that we often find interface issues which turn out through the research which are not beneficial either to the learning outcomes or don't work out for the learners at all. And this is something we gain through that research. The last area is the one, reuse of the data for a new learning situation. And what that basically is, and I will give you an example of all three of them shortly, is that you collect data and you use that data and feed it back into the system in your learning environment, but it has now a different application. And to illustrate that, I'm going to illustrate that with you in something I did recently for a research project.